Hi, I'm Dave. Welcome to the channel. I haven't said this for a while, but today is a good day because today is a new Revoslot day. I'll spare you the unboxing because you've seen me take 6 other Revoslots out of a very similar box in the past. This is from the second release of 3 liveries of the Mk1 Escort from Revoslot, the Texaco Wooding Mk1 Escort, which was campaigned in the 1971 and 1972 DRM touring car seasons. This car was a partnership between Broadspeed in the UK and German race team Wooding, and it was variously driven by Paul Bergner, Christian Smarja and Gerald Schuler. This car actually started life as a factory new 1300 GT spec Ford Escort and was originally prepared in 1969 by Mk1 and then handed to Broadspeed, who took the standard carburetted engine out and fitted their own fuel injection lump, which it ran for a couple of years, and then they put in a massive 1600 280 horsepower fuel injected engine in a car weighing only 800 kilograms. It then raced in the DRM in 71, winning the under 2 litre class outright that year with Smarja at the wheel. Schuler then drove the car for the 72 season, and he either came first or second, or he didn't finish at all. So that didn't work out quite so well. The car was also campaigned in the European Hill Climb Championships in 72 by Jörg Obermeiser and Peter Kramer. It was a very busy car. Wooding fought on with Zaxbyt for a couple of years, but the team stopped in 1973. The car was then campaigned for quite a few more seasons in hill climb and various saloon classes, and despite going through a number of owners, it retained this gold and black livery throughout, ending up in a private collection of a German Ford collector in 1990, where it then sat unused until it was purchased in 2013, renovated and given a new Craig Beck racing engine, and it gained a new HTP Historic Technical Passport in 2016, and it went on to run with good results in the Historic Touring Car Championships and other historic events. To this day, in 2023, this car still retains an HTP which is valid until 2026, so I'm sure it will still be campaigned for some years to come. So it is fairly standard Revoslot stuff, very high quality finish, with the usual nice lightweight interior in it, and the paint on this and the clear coat on it is immaculate. All the usual Revoslot goodies inside, 2-piece aluminium chassis with the little rattle bolts. One thing I have noted on this one is that as it's come out of the box, the gear mesh is particularly sloppy, to the point that the teeth are barely meshing at all. But there is plenty of adjustment for that when we get to it in a little while. I don't really like Revoslot braids. I tend to change them, so we'll probably change them in the process here. But as we haven't done a full chipping of a Revoslot video for a while on this channel, I thought I'd go through the whole process again, just for new people to the channel. I'm going to put in the FT Slot Technic SCD 1044 Carrera digital chip. For this I will need a ruler and a pencil, a punch and a hammer, some blue tack, a little bit of wood, a 3mm drill bit in a drill and a bigger drill bit. Doesn't matter how big, just bigger. Some solder and a soldering iron. It's quite a menu, this, isn't it? And of course, a cup of coffee in a magnetic racing mug. So these chips are a bit trickier to fit in than the 2022 chip, but I'm kind of off those chips now. They cause problems with the CU, so I tend to use these 1044 chips of the 2 FT Slot Technic ones. Now we need to drill a hole for the sensor, and we need to be 12.5mm from the middle of the chassis outwards. And I just kind of draw a line along make myself a little crosshair of where I think I can get the sensor hole through. Now this will be a 3mm hole, so you need to allow for that when you're drawing across. Don't get it too near that brass thing. I was going to use that yellow punch that I showed you before, but I'm going to use this blue one now because it's a bit more pointy. Just mark the point where I'm going to drill the hole so the drill bit doesn't slide about. 3mm drill bit. This always looks terrible, this, but it's not. So you can see a sensor goes exactly through the hole there. It does come with a little collar in the kit for the chip, but I don't tend to use it. It's just too fiddly. I'll just take the sharp burrs off the hole I've drilled with a slightly larger drill bit. And now before we get any older, we need to hoover up all these little bits of metal so they don't get in all the bearings and the motor and everything. And there's a few ways you could put the chip in this car, but I'm going to go for that kind of long ways approach, and I'll put a big lump of blue tack under it so that it just, yeah, no, it's going to be that way round, and I'll keep it elevated above the brass rattle nuts. So good old big lump of blue tack. The great thing about blue tack is it cushions the chip from vibration in the car as well, so it's less likely to all shake apart too quickly. Well, that's what I tell myself anyway. It's also a lot easier to fit that way. So you just squidge it down and it's fitted. So the red and black wires on the chip go to the guide, and because it's Carrera, the red one goes on the left of the car and the black one goes on the right. If you're used to normal analog cars, yes, that's traditionally the wrong way round, but this is the correct way to get the Carrera stuff right. And the grey and purple ones go to the motor. So I will just trim all of those off. Bit of coffee. And a little bit of solder on the soldering iron. I'm just going to tin, as they say, the wires. So that just basically means getting the wire warm enough that the solder will melt into it and just touching it on the end of all 4 wires, just to leave a little bit of solder on each one. And this is a little bit of electrical heat shrink which we'll use to cover up the joins in the wires once we are done. But remember to slide the heat shrink onto the wires before you solder them together, otherwise it's not going to work. Now what I was going to do was show you beautifully how I soldered all these things together and heat shrunk the wires, but I stupidly forgot where the camera was and all you could see was the back of my hand while I was doing that, so bear with me. Here it is done. Grey wire goes to the red on the motor, purple wire goes to the black on the motor, and then it's definitely the right way round. I'm going to remove the braids from the guide that I've got there. Use some standard Slotting Plus 035 braid. Now I've chopped these bits sort of deliberately too long at the moment, a bit more coffee. Using the pieces that I took off when I pulled the original wires out. Poke that wire through, bend the end over. You probably know how to do this, but not everybody does, so this is why it's in the video. Now the bits of braid go in from the top, it's just easier that way. And now I'll fold these down and you'll see they're too long, but that's okay. They shouldn't really go past the end of the guide blade. So I'll just trim those off a little bit. On your track you might be able to just keep the braids that came with the Revoslot, but they just don't really work well on my Carrera track. I've not quite worked out why, but it's better this way. And last thing to do here is pop the sensor into the hole that we drilled for the sensor and just squidge a piece of blue tack around it to hold it in place. And just get the end of a flat blade screwdriver here and make sure that the blue tack isn't bridging the gap between the two bits of chassis, because that would restrict the movement, which defeats the point of having a two-part chassis. So there's the sensor just sitting nicely through the hole. And that's fitted. So that's one Group 2 Revoslot car converted to Carrera Digital. Wasn't too painful, was it? So now I'm going to take this as a separate exercise, which is preparing the car to put it on the track. Now you could put it straight on the track and that would be fine, and I'm sure it would run alright. But it's best to oil things, and I use Singer sewing machine oil. So oil the front bearings for the wheels, just make sure they spin okay. And looking at that tyre, it's not quite on straight and there's a bit of a bulge in it, so I'll try and get it as straight as I can to start with. Bit of oil in the back wheel bearings as well. I suppose they're axle bearings, not wheel bearings, aren't they? The gear mesh that was barely touching before has obviously moved very slightly. It's not touching at all now. So if I slacken off these 3 bolts that hold the motor onto the chassis, you can, as you can see, adjust the motor so that its mesh with the gears is how you like it, or how it should be. That's too tight, so I'll undo it, move it back a fraction. Still not happy with it. No. So there's still a little bit of slap in the gear mesh there, so we'll have another go. And just a little bit of grease on the pinion. And that should do us to start with. This is what Marty Ford at Two Lines calls a bass tune. It's just making sure it's actually fit for the track. And to that end, we should probably put it on the track. And it's a Revoslot. It handles pretty well. What can you say? They always do out of the box. They don't need an awful lot. The tyres, well, you can sort of sand them briefly just to get the high spots off initially, but don't worry too much. They're really soft tyres. They'll wear in on your track and make themselves very round in only a few laps. One thing I have noticed though is when this car turns left, it makes a lot more noise. There. On the right hand turns quiet. Left hand turns a bit of a grinding noise. So we're going to have a bit of a look at that. I think I know what the problem is. There is a little bit too much sideways play in this rear axle. So as the car is turning left, the axle is moving away from the pinion gear and the mesh is changing, which is making that noise. You can see it there, just about. So what I'm going to do is just loosen off that ground gear and move it slightly towards the axle bearing housing. So it removes the possibility of it slopping from side to side, and then adjust the motor up so the mesh is good again. And you'll notice there's good gear mesh in that direction and there's no real side to side slop in the axle now. So that should have helped. And let's see if it has. There's no discernible change in the note when it's turning left or turning right anymore. So the gear mesh, while it is still a little bit noisy, and it will take a few laps, quite a few laps, for the gear mesh to sort of wear itself in and quieten down, because these Revoslots with these metal gears, they're just like that. So while the mesh is not perfect, it's also not moving about and varying. So I can now run this car quite happily, put quite a lot of laps on it. Of course, it's going to perform pretty much lap-wise exactly the same as my other Escort and my other Revoslots. They're all in that kind of 5.6 to 5.7 bracket on my track. They're all the same, beautifully matched. As always, thanks for watching one of my videos. If you liked it, you'll find a button specifically for that. If you subscribe to the channel, that does help. And if you hit the bell, you'll get a notification the next time I post a video. And of course, check out this Slot Car channel.